everyone. My name is Gretchen Renshaw, and I am so proud to serve as the conductor of the Hendrix College Wind Ensemble, and we are thrilled to present to you tonight a concert that we are calling Sustained. This is a concert that is actually its second edition. We did the first version of this last November, and at the time we didn't realize it, but we created a framework that we could use here again and again, but also we can offer up to other educators and artists to use in their spaces as well. So last November, we performed this concert where we played music to evoke the different, what are called sustainability mindset principles, and these were put together all in an effort to try to help people develop themselves such that they would have sustainability mindsets. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the SMPs, as they are called, in short here in a moment. But what I want to emphasize here is that last year we played one program of music, and this year we're doing an entirely different program of music, but still with that same goal of carrying the message of the sustainability mindset principles. So if you'll allow me to get my slide clicker, I'll tell you a little bit more about what we're doing tonight. All right, so the creator of the sustainability mindset principles is Dr. Isabel Rimanoxi, and her definition of a sustainability mindset is this: a particular way of thinking and being that is expressed in actions for the greater good. So there are 12 of these in total, and I happened to have the opportunity to go to a workshop with Dr. Rimanoxi a couple of years ago, where she encouraged us, a bunch of college professors, to think about ways that we could meaningfully incorporate the SMPs into our own courses. Just so happened that at the time I was thinking about, okay, how can we use bands towards engaged citizenship kinds of efforts? And there I was at this workshop, and everything just came together. So last November, we did the first version of this concert. Dr. Rimanoxi, I don't know if she's able to join us on the live stream tonight, but she joined last year, and shortly after that, she was inviting me to speak to her what's called the Storytelling Circle with the Principles for Responsible Management Education group, which she leads, which is associated with the United Nations. I spoke to that group in May. They were super excited. They're the ones who helped me understand the framework that we created, and then shortly after that, Isabel asked if I would write a chapter for a forthcoming book called Transforming Mindsets, the Power of Arts-Based Pedagogy for Sustainability. So all this to say, this concert that I innocently put together last November, having no idea where it might go, has had literally international reach. And so I'm really excited to be able to do a second edition of it here with some new music. So for those of you who might not be familiar with the sustainability mindset principles, I want to offer you a window into what those are. So there are 12 of them, and they are arranged in 4 different content areas. And we're going to play music that expresses some of these from each of the 4 content areas. So the first one is systems perspective. I know that might be a little hard to see. So the 4 that are there include long-term thinking, flow and cycles, both and thinking, and interconnections. Then we have ecological worldview, which contains the principles of eco-literacy and my contribution. Emotional intelligence, which includes the principles of reflection, self-awareness, and creative innovation. And finally, spiritual intelligence, which includes the principles of oneness with nature, mindfulness, and purpose. So through Isabel's research, she discovered that if folks develop themselves along these 12 principles, we are much more likely to have a sustainability mindset so that we can live sustainable lives and contribute positively to the planet. So here tonight, this is how our concert program maps onto these SMPs. So first we're going to play a piece by Stephen Bryant called The Machine Awakes, and it's supposed to get at the idea of both and thinking. What I mean by that is, it is a piece that if you are looking at the digital program notes, it's a piece that's supposed to emulate a machine waking up. And that got me thinking about things like the Industrial Revolution and all the other kinds of technological advances that on the one hand are really good for humanity, but on the other hand can also simultaneously be really bad for the planet. So we're going to play that in just a second for you, and it's got this really cool electronic track you get to play along with. Then we're going to play a piece called Echoes of a Northern Lake, which gets at the idea of eco-literacy and my contributions. I'll talk a little bit more about that piece when we get to it. Then we have 2 pieces that help us connect with the emotional intelligence content area, and then 1 that helps us get at the spiritual intelligence area. So without further ado, we're going to get started exploring the systems perspective category. Again, we're looking at the idea of both and thinking. We're going to hear the sounds of this machine awakening that could be a harbinger of good things, but also maybe not so good things when it comes to the planet. So next, we're going to visit a piece that helps us think about the ecological worldview content area. And this piece is wonderful for so many reasons, but one of the reasons is because it helps us get at both eco-literacy and my contribution. So this piece that you're about to hear is called Echoes of a Northern Lake by Kate Nishimura, who is a Canadian composer. And in this piece, she is writing what she calls little vignettes about her experience growing up in areas which had northern lakes. And if there are any folks who know things about birds and know things about lakes in the north, you might know that common loons, or other kinds of loons, not just the common ones, but loons in general, are very common in those lakes. And people you might have heard who have lived in or spent some summers in northern lands where these loons are present, you will probably hear them talk about how captivating, interesting the sounds are of these birds as they call to each other throughout the night. I'm going to let you hear some loons in a little bit, like actually loons, well not for real, on a video. Just clarify. I only say that because we had Snickers the Snake over at the gallery, so I didn't want anybody to get confused or get their hopes up too high that I would have calling loons right here in Staples. Not tonight. But we are going to hear them on a video in a moment, but then you're going to get to hear the band imitating the loon calls. So what Kate does in this piece is she has us imitating some loon calls throughout the piece, because what she's trying to express through this music is her gratitude for these spaces in which she grew up, but also trying to help us recognize that climate change is leading to the decline of the kinds of habitats that we really need. And so in that way, we're getting both at the eco-literacy and my contribution sustainability mindset principles. So I'm going to adjust some volume so that nobody gets hurt while listening to the loons. So if you'll give me just a moment to do that, I will play this little video. It's not really loon calls, but someone from associated with the Cornell Ornithology Group who's going to talk about loons.
On many an occasion, I've been camping in the Adirondacks, and one of my favorite periods is right at dusk, when the lake becomes absolutely glass-like. The sun is setting, but you can still see the silhouettes of trees, all these conical spires. Beautiful reflection on the water, the last few bits of sunlight, and then you hear the wail of a loon. You'll hear one individual of the pair give this long, mournful wail, which is essentially saying, "I'm here, where are you?" Generally, moments later, you'll hear the response from the other member of the pair giving its wail, saying, "I'm over here." Loons are active at night. You can be out at a beautiful Adirondack lake after dark, or a northern Minnesota lake, and this is one of the characteristic, evocative sounds you're going to hear from that area, something that'll stick with you for the rest of your life. It just punctuates the fall of night and really sets the mood for what follows, the solitude, the peacefulness. It's all wrapped up in that one vocalization.
we're going to move to the next content area, which is emotional intelligence. We have two pieces in this category, and the first one is going to get specifically at the idea of creative innovation. So we have a piece of music called Winds of Change, which is by Randall Standridge. And he happens to not only live in Arkansas, but he was born and raised in Little Rock, and now he's gone on to an illustrious career as a composer. And I should also mention, too, that the first piece we played by Stephen Bryant was also born and raised in Little Rock, Arkansas. So it's great to be able to play two Arkansan composers on this program. So the reason why Winds of Change helps us get at the idea of creative innovation is because it's all about wind power. And so that is, when we think about creatively innovating, we're thinking about, in this particular context, how can we innovate creative solutions to help us solve the challenges of the climate crisis? And so, renewable forms of energy, like wind energy, fit that bill. It also happens, too, that this piece was the repertoire vote winner for this particular concert cycle, so I'm excited to get to share with you their choice for a piece we played on this concert. So I hope you enjoy Randall Standridge's Winds of Change. with the reflection sustainability mindset principle. And for this one, we are going to be playing a piece of music called Vishnaya Pamyat, which means memory, or which translates from Ukrainian to memory eternal. And it was written by Icelandic composer Hildur Guðnadóttir in 2019 to go along with the Chernobyl miniseries that was done, released through and is now streaming on HBO Max. So, without going into the full story of the Chernobyl disaster, I'll give you some of the parts about it that I think are particularly important for us to think about. So in 1987, there was a major nuclear meltdown at the Chernobyl nuclear reactor, and it was, and I think still is considered the worst nuclear disaster in the history of the planet. And so nuclear power, of course, is an effort to have a different kind of fuel source other than fossil fuels. And while it is safe the majority of the time, when it came to the way that the USSR was running their nuclear power plants, there were some major issues. And it wasn't exclusively an issue with any kind of science, because the scientists there were doing all the research that was necessary to provide a safe nuclear reactors. The problem actually became the system. The governmental structures that were in place that actually prevented the scientists who had the data that could have prevented the nuclear disaster from actually happening, had they not been pressured by the bureaucracy that was telling them to keep quiet. I hope, and I strongly recommend this series, the Chernobyl miniseries. As far as I'm aware, it has been done in a highly historically accurate kind of way, and so while it's not exactly like a documentary, it is pretty close in a lot of respects. And in it, we follow the gentleman, Valery Legasov, who was the scientist who was called in to Chernobyl to evaluate what happened, because even that was quite a mystery to unravel, because so many people at the plant just didn't even want to believe that what had happened, the reactor core blew up. They couldn't believe that that was actually possible. But that's in fact what happened, and so he was there for months trying to figure out how to prevent a secondary disaster caused by these the nuclear waste eating through the things that were underneath the structure. So we follow the story of Valery Legasov and his efforts to finally bring the truth to the surface. And I promise I won't give anything away, except it's history, so it's not really giving things away. But it's really good and you should watch it. So what we're going to play is the music that is played along with the epilogue at the very end of the last episode. And I've got up here on the screen just without the audio from the actual show, the video part of it. I edited a little bit to fit the music that we're playing, because we have an arrangement of this music. Originally, this was written for a men's choir. It is absolutely haunting in that format, and we'll do our best to emulate that here in the band setting. But this is a very emotional piece. It is meant to, as the title suggests, give us an opportunity to reflect on all of the lives that were lost, both indirectly and then years later indirectly, through the Chernobyl disaster. So we're going to take a quick tuning pitch before this one, and then we'll play for you Vishnaya Pamyat. So now we come to our last piece, which is just a whole lot of fun. But I'm going to tell you more about that in just a moment. For now, I just want to pause and acknowledge this tremendous group of folks that you have in front of you. And I just want to kind of acknowledge and pull out the different members of the Hendricks and Conway community who make up this group. So, with that, if you are a member of the Conway community who is joining us, can you please wave your hands? Yeah, Conway community friends. If you happen to be a Hendricks alum, can you wave for us? I do want to point out, just so I don't forget, so Alicia Victoria, back there in percussion lane, just graduated at the end of last spring, but then she happened to be in the area, and I happened to see her in the fall, and I said, hey Alicia, you interested in playing some percussion? And she said yes! And I'm so glad that I've gotten to work with her for what I'm going to call her super senior year in band, although she has officially graduated, don't you worry. But, Alicia, in case this is going to be your last concert with us, okay, so I wanted to make sure to acknowledge Alicia. If you can please give her a big hand. This is our last concert. Your staff member, wave your hand. You are a guest musician who looked at this music for the first time yesterday. Casey, will you wave your hand? You are a last minute illness and saxophone lane, and Casey jumped in, and we're so grateful that she could do that. And last but not least, to the folks who make up the core of this group are, of course, the Hendricks students. Hendricks students, could you wave your hands? It's a tremendous joy getting to work with these folks. Just in general, but I really, really appreciate the sense of community that we've been able to build between these very different groups of folks, from the folks who have been playing, just for the last 6 or 8 years since high school, and for the folks who've been playing for the last number of years that I will not quantify. I still appreciate their willingness to be part of this group and to do this thing together as a team. And yeah, I'm really grateful to get to work with this team. So I also want to say a few thank yous to the folks who are helping us with the gallery that some of you may have gotten to visit. It's over in the Wingate Museum space. So Christian Cutler and his team have opened up that space to us. So over there, if you haven't visited already, we have some tables set up by some different organizations on campus that are related to sustainability efforts. We also have a table with the sustainability mindset principles all defined if you want to take a look at that. And importantly, there are snacks. And so I really hope you'll come join us over in the Wingate for a post-concert reception to help eat the snacks and see the other stuff. But it also just so happens that the Wingate Museum has a couple of exhibits that are very much related to the theme of our concert. One of them is the K-12 art exhibit that you can see if you walk along the outside of the building, all different kinds of images of nature. And then inside of the building, there's an exhibit that has to do with conservation of Arkansas fisheries. So I hope you'll go over and check those things out after the concert. With that, I think we're ready for our last piece, which gets at the spiritual intelligence content area. And specifically, this one is going to get at oneness with nature. Now, if you're looking at your program and you're thinking, I need a Totoro, what the heck does that have to do with nature? I'm here to tell you it has a lot to do with nature. And also, it's just really great music, so I'm so excited that we get to play. Oh, I think we have some bands down here in the front. Great, good vibes. So, the short version of the story from My Neighbor Totoro centers on these two young girls who are sisters as they interact with these spirits, friendly spirits, in the woods by their house. And it just so happens that these spirits, well, the main spirit, Totoro, we could consider what's called a kami, which is a deity, one of many deities in the Shinto religion, which was the traditional religion in Japan until Buddhism came over from China, and now both still exist, but Shintoism is the original, religion of Japan. It just so happens that Shintoism is very much tied to environmental themes. And so we have this Totoro character. I hope you'll look up a picture of Totoro. He's adorable. This Totoro character who's basically helping these girls through various trials of having And at the end, he's helping them reach their mother, who is recovering from a long-term illness, and she's in a hospital nearby. But this is in rural Japan. They don't have a car, they don't even have a bike. And so, who comes to the aid? The cat bus. Oh yes, there's a bus. That's a cat. With a lot of legs. You gotta see this film. If you haven't seen it already, it is adorable. But it also very much helps us connect with this idea of nature and the way nature intersects with our lives. And in this case, nature is intersecting with the young girl's lives through the form of Totoro, this lovely, giant, fluffy creature who helps them accomplish some really important tasks. So without further ado, we're going to tune one more time here, and then we're going to play for you music from My Neighbor Totoro. Thanks again so much for coming out, and hope to see you over at the reception.